Welcome to the Yarn Barn.
G'day, Chris. It's awesome to have you here inside of the Yarn Barn. It's been an awesome, an awesome experience for me. I was just sort of touching a little bit on it just as we were talking before hitting record. Is just the awesome experience just being able to have these conversations with other dads and men just in this space of being able to provide something that maybe will help someone who's listening. And I'm really excited to have this conversation because I think that based off of some of the things that I've learned from you via the social media forum, I think there's going to be a lot of good sort of takeaways and little nuggets of wisdom from you that we'll be able to share to the guys in our community and the guys that listen to this. So thank you for jumping on board and having a yarn with me inside of our virtual Yarn Barn. And I think just to start off, it'd be awesome if you could just give us a bit of an introduction as to who you are, where you are, and what you do.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Liam, for inviting me to be here, man. And I really admire the work that you're doing and the just creating community for dads. And I think it's so important that we all feel supported as fathers because, I think there's a lot of men out there who are fathers and who don't own that role as much as they should, and because of that, it's kind of an interesting demographic that gets ignored. The dad role, it's either romanticized or avoided, it seems, and I really like that you seem to keep it really real, and that's what I'm all about as well. So my name is Christopher David, and I am currently living in just north of Melbourne in Victoria. I recently moved here down from Mackay, where we've been through the COVID washing machine for the last few years. And prior to that, I was living in northern New South Wales, where I met my wife. And prior to that, I was spent my whole life in the United States. So I'm a migrant, I guess it's immigrant, as of 2016, and haven't been back there to the States, but it's definitely been a really, I think that's a big part of who I am. Not that I'm wearing the flag on my chest or anything, but I feel like that experience that I've had of living in that interesting country has helped shape me and my values, and gave me the inspiration to leave and explore the world. And because of that, I've accumulated a sort of a wide set of knowledge and experiences that I like to share with people through workshops and coaching. And I was just thinking about it this morning as I was brushing my teeth, what we might end up talking about. And, I really kind of refrain from calling myself a coach. It's not a word that I really like all that much, but ever since I can remember, people have come to me for advice, like even from a young age. I remember spending hours on the phone, kind of giving girls who weren't my girlfriends or had no interest in, but like literally hours every single day, kind of giving them advice and just holding space for them. And it's something that I really like to do, is just to not tell people what to do, but to empower them with their own wisdom, with their own inner guidance, and it brings me joy, and that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, whether it be through yoga, breath work, ice baths, ecstatic dance, nature connection, a whole range of sort of activities that some people might hear that, oh, this guy's a weirdo, let's turn this off now. But I guess I'd really like to chat about today, how I believe how relevant these practices are, and how it doesn't have to be just for the hippie woo-woo crystal wearing individual.
I 100% agree with you on a whole range of the fronts that you mentioned there, as far as, being able to connect with a whole bunch of different things that are outside of ourselves, but also, and we talk about this inside. So if you're still listening, if you haven't switched off like 3 seconds ago from when Chris was talking about that, stick with us, because this is stuff that's not just external to us. And we talk about this a bit, and I talk about some of this connection inside the Yarn Barn from time to time. Yes, there's external things that we can do, but it all has something to do with our inner self as well. So there's a combination of things that, and there's one question that I want to raise just quickly at the end of this, is just go, like, we've got inner stuff that we can do and support ourselves, a range of different things, which I know we'll touch on, but there's also that external stuff and that physical environment stuff that we can work on as well. But it all has to be somewhat connected, and we have to appreciate that we can't ignore both of these elements of our life, right? So one of the questions before we dive deep into that, because I know we can, one of the questions that come from what you mentioned just before was, that a lot of us don't own the role of being a dad. So can you explain a little bit more about that and how that sort of plays out in your day?
Yeah. Well, Liam, I guess the reason I can see that is because it must be partially true for me somewhere. And so before, it comes off as a judgment of others, I want to just pause and reflect, for myself, where I'm not doing that. Because I wouldn't have said it otherwise. If I see that in others, it's because it's something that's true for me. And I think it is partially because when we really allow ourselves to be present to the energy of children, it can be fucking overwhelming and confronting to our ego, which has been at the center of the spotlight since day dot. And many of us might not have had ideal role models for what it means to step outside of your own needs and desires and serve another being. And that's not necessarily our father's fault or our mother's fault or our teacher's fault. It's society as a whole that really seems to encourage this, self-centered way of living. And I think particularly for men who haven't been offered the space, the guidance to connect with tricky emotions, that it becomes just too much, And so with guys and with myself, I know that when things get too much, I just block them out, right? And so parenting is too much all the time, and that, for me, that's a fact. It's like, it's so overwhelming, and you're constantly being pulled under the water. But at the same time, there's so many reasons to come back up. And I think that's the journey of it, is owning the fact that it's hard, owning the fact that it's humbling. And for a lot of us who have grown up in sort of a macho culture, and who've been fed the story that our primary role in life should be to make money and spend money, that just falls by the wayside, and that's why I think you see quite a lot of people whose families are deteriorating because the fathers aren't willing to hold the role, and it's not so much that they're not willing, it just that they don't have the reference for it to hold that emotional, like, tidal wave of supporting other beings. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's a sufficient answer.
Look, it's your answer, and no, I appreciate that. I think there's I mean, there's a couple of things that I took away from that in particular, and that's, you know, that constant feeling of like drowning. That it's not constant, like, you know, every second of the day, because there is moments when you are able to stop for a second and appreciate for what's around you, and you know, especially. Yeah. Especially those, you know, those. I'm in it now. That I've got a 7 and 8 year old boys, and it's it's a transition time for them, but it's also for us as well as parents. You know, we're trying to understand how to support them, but it's really hard for us to do it as well. And so, you know, there's a whole range of things that, you know we can do. Like, we can take time for ourselves. We can go out and you know, keep the kids busy and burn their energy and, you know, do all those kinds of things to help. But at the end of the day, there's a ton of stuff that's still a massive struggle, and I know every parent can relate. You know, unless they've had a nanny that's been able to look after the kids and do all that sort of stuff for them for their whole life, and they just rock up as an adult. But still, there's probably a ton of stuff that needs to be worked out then. But you know, it's an interesting place to be, because you know, we can sort of reflect on some of that role, you know, when you talked about the role of a dad, but there's also elements of what has the previous roles of those male figures in this dad's life previously had an impact that he doesn't want to recreate. You know, is scared to be that role of a dad because doesn't want to be recreating what he has seen previously. So there's a bunch of stuff, I suppose, that comes from that too. So, you know, if we're fearing stepping into ourselves as a role of a dad, but also there's got to be an element of that we haven't tapped into who we are as an individual as well. So go on.
That's a great segue, I think. Yeah, into kind of. For me, what is at the core of my purpose, really, and what I consider my work is really helping individuals, men or women, you know, parents or not parents, to cultivate self-awareness around that, to tap into what I call your true nature, which doesn't necessarily mean, like I said before, you know, changing the way you dress or chanting mantras everywhere you go. But it sometimes those outer things do facilitate, you know, if you're doing them in a sincere way, do facilitate a genuine knowing of oneself. And sometimes we have to go on the journey to the extreme of going right down the rabbit hole and you know, joining all the workshops, all the retreats, and to learn, oh, okay, this is great, but actually I'm more, you know, I'm not this, I'm more of this, or whatever that is, you know. And for me, I focus on working with people who are just, I'd call them regular people, you know. Like, I don't want to work, no offense, with, you know, the traditional Byron Bay scene. You know, I'm more interested in working with the miners, with the people who, you know, are running their own businesses, who are struggling to stay on top of mental stress, emotional stress, because they're juggling family and work and all of this. And oftentimes my clients are ones who are sort of at a crossroads in life. You know, maybe their kids have grown up and left home and they're trying to figure out what they want to do with themselves. Maybe they're, you know, a lot of folks are, because I used to live up in Mackay, a lot of my clients were coming out of the mining culture and realizing that wasn't for them, and they wanted to figure out what they do want in life, what they do, what is their truth, you know. And to go back to where we started just a moment ago, I think that why I enjoy working with people who are at that point of, okay, I'm ready to look within. I'm ready to kind of unpack some of those traits or qualities or beliefs that I've inherited from God knows where, and start to kind of find my own path. And whatever that might look like, at the end, I have personally found that it takes some of our time and energy to look within, and the best tools for that often are utilizing the yogic or the meditation techniques for quieting the mind, because ultimately that's yoga is a science for quieting the mind. It's not a religion, although it has been incorporated into some religions. It's not a religion. It's like a very practical set of techniques that for thousands of years humans have been using to quiet the restlessness of the mind, which is what, if you boil it down, that's why we struggle to, embrace our roles as father. That's why we, push things away, and sometimes, turn to unhealthy habits, because we're afraid to look at all of the noise. We're afraid to actually address all of that, turmoil within. But it's beautiful, because so many people are actually, once they feel support, once they feel that motivation to do so, it's actually not that hard. It doesn't have to be fancy schmancy spiritual learning, but the right things come to you. And in my job, I see it is as to provide people with what resonates with them. I don't believe in a cookie cutter approach. I kind of speak to each person one-on-one and say, okay, cool, look, this is something that I think I've come across that I think might be relevant to you. See how you go with it, whether it's a book or a practice. And I really enjoy that kind of like just filtering for them through all the bullshit that's out there and say, look, this is a direct transmission. This is a book that was written thousands of years ago, not something that's just come out as this newfangled technique. Let's try working with this for a little bit. See what this opens up for you, what doors this opens up for you. And it's been a really beautiful opportunity to hold space for people in that way, especially in that culture that is so closed off to these things. And I have worked with a lot of men, and man, that's my favorite thing to do, is to support fathers, and 99% of them are fathers. Support fathers to really be the best versions of themselves, and to take time for themselves in a way that isn't that isn't filled with distractions, I'd say.
That's a tough gig, because we are constantly distracted by so many things. Like it is when you talk about what you mentioned as far as true nature, and we are constantly distracted by the social media, the emails, the family, the kids, the neighbors. Like there's always something happening, and I think for guys it's always easier to, especially guys who haven't sort of gone in and explored a space of learning about themselves and finding opportunities or things that work for them to quieten the mind and just be within and create that space, I suppose, between the distractions, extend that space, because some of it, I suppose, is about, maybe again goes back to potentially that fear of not wanting to explore some of those things that are potentially underneath the surface, but also not knowing how. So not knowing how to build self-awareness. Like, how do I just Google that? Like how do I explore that part of myself? And I think, when you mentioned, and a question will sort of come from this, I think, but right now it's just reminding me of, like, when we talk about, there's so much out there. There's so many distractions, but there's also so many different rabbit holes that we can go down as far as personal development goes. And that can be extremely overwhelming. I've been through that phase as well over the years, where it's just, 1 minute, oh, that looks really cool and shiny, and I'll go down there, and then there's another thing that comes up, and that's sort of almost conflicting the last thing. So it can be quite confusing. But I think one of the things that just popped into my mind was that the ice cream shop, and like most guys will be happy to go in there and just try every type of flavor, just try it once, and that's an easy thing to do. And I think at some stage throughout that journey, you're going to find the flavor that is just the bomb. That's the one that you're going to have every time you go in there from now on, you just go, I'm going to go in. It's just going to be the peanut butter and chocolate chip. That's all I'm getting. And kind of, I suppose, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, as far as like, that inner wellness, discovering yourself, personal development, that whole sort of big space that it is. How do you recommend to someone that comes to you and say, I'm just starting out on this journey? Like, how can what you do supports me? How can what you do supports me in being better myself and I suppose move forward on a journey that I don't even know really where I'm going yet.
I'm a relationships guy, and I tend to believe in the power of that sort of non-verbal exchange that occurs between individuals. And so what I mean by this, I don't know if you're familiar with or the listeners would be familiar with the law of attraction, but I generally trust that, the universe gives us exactly what we need. Yeah. And puts us in front of the people that we need to learn from, whether they turn out to be our guru or somebody that we decide is a total bullshitter in 3 months. We needed to go through that experience and for our own growth and development. So when somebody comes to me, it's like, I always say, look, I don't want to sell you anything, even though I charge, for my services. I'm not here to sell you anything. If you know this is right, then I want you to trust that. But if you're questioning it, then let's explore what else is out there, because I'm really genuinely interested in building relationships with people, and I think it's through that exchange that we can get from learning from one another, where I put myself in the position of, look, we're on this journey together. I might be 1 or 2 steps ahead of you, but I don't have all the answers. And here's what I've learned, that based on what you've told me about your life, I think this is going to work or help you in some way. So when I go to the ice cream shop, I want to get to know the person serving the ice cream, and then decide whether I trust them. And then if I feel I can trust them, I don't ask them a million questions, but I just kind of like feel into it. And I'm like, well, what's your favorite flavor? What do you got? Because I don't do well with a million decisions to make. And so I generally, seriously, I will ask, well, what's your favorite thing on the menu? And if it kind of aligns to what I'm looking for, then yeah, cool, I'll give it a go. But if it's like, mint, I hate mint ice cream. If it's like mint, then I'll be like, oh, no, actually, I'll just go with my old usual, whatever. So I kind of using that as an analogy to really encourage people to not just fall into the shiny bauble syndrome, which is so easy to do with social media, because advertisements are everywhere. And I think to really feel into one thing at a time. There's a great metaphor that comes from one of my yogic teachers, and it says, if you're digging a well for water, do you go out and dig 1,000 holes, or do you dig one hole really deep? So if you really want to get to the water, you keep going in that one hole. You don't start half-assed digging one hole over there, one hole over there. You follow that through until you really get what you were looking for. And maybe that water tastes putrid, and you decide, I'm going to go look for another well. And that's okay. It's not like one way is, I stay away from anything that says this is the only way. This is the only technique you'll ever need. This is the only, mantra you'll ever need to recite. For me, it's about taking that sort of Epicurean view, but giving a dedication its place in terms of sticking with one thing for a little while. And that's why I generally encourage people to try something out for about a 90-day period. And then if that doesn't work, move on to the next thing.
Yeah, awesome. That's I think that's a really good way to explain the process of just go all in with something. Like, just if you're new to this space, if you're not really sure what flavor ice cream you want to try, I think that's a really good part too. Actually, is having a conversation with the the person working in the shop, but also just to not just touch the surface of something, right? Because it's very easy for us to just scroll past instead of stopping and getting involved in the process or the video or whatever it is. Find something that you resonate with. It feels good. There's a lot to be said about that intuition and just following that, and I don't think a lot of us do enough. So follow that, and then just continue the journey for a bit and see. Once you get to that point, like that well, you start tasting that water. You go, yes, it's for me, or no, it's not. But at least along that journey too, to get to that point, there is a ton of stuff that would come from that, positive things that would come from that too. Like, you don't just do all this stuff, across, say, 89 days of the 90 days that you're suggesting, and nothing happens across that journey. Like, there's stuff that's going to be really positive that goes through that journey as well. Like, a lot of learnings that would come from that kind of a journey. And then on the 90th day, you're like, no, I've done it. Especially that commitment. You've said, all right, I'm going to do it.
Yes.
I'm going to do it. And that's, for a lot of guys, that's probably a really hard thing. I know for myself, that's something that I've struggled with over the years is following through to the final day of something that I've committed to. And that has a massive flow-on effect to, my kids are at age now where they're starting to see, well, you said you're going to do it, but you didn't do it. And it's like, oh, no. And, and my wife's the same. She's seen me do things over the years, say I'm going to do something, but haven't fully followed through with it. And that's as someone who's gone through a fair bit of personal development, a lot to do, always a student, but it's that hits home with me now. It's like other people are seeing me not fully commit.
And how does that make you feel as a man?
Well, I think I probably put it as for anybody, like it's male or female. I suppose there's probably an element of it doesn't sit well with me. Like I feel that tension internally, that it's not right. Like it's like for me now, with my boys being 7 and 8 years of age, it's really important that I do as much as I can to be the best version of myself, so they see it as well. They're as much as I, sometimes I was like, I wish they didn't see that sort of part of me. Like, they have. And even when I don't think they're watching me, they're watching and they're listening and they're taking it in. And like, you distracted, they're watching TV or they're reading a book or something. They're still paying attention. So it does twist me up inside sometimes and over the past, if I reflect on that, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm very much the same, man. And I have found that accountability is really the only thing that works for me, and even that is not always 100% effective. But I feel that we, when, like I said before, I'm a relationships guy, and if we have somebody in our corner that we know is a real person, that they're not just on the screen, that we've met them and we've built a little bit of rapport with, then there's that element of trust and support that's there. And I feel that is really what allows us to transform as individuals. That's what really allows us to do our own inner work. Not that my clients are looking to me for answers or anything. It's just that by having somebody in our lives that is seeing us is allowing us to be somewhat vulnerable in our inner world, then it gives us the space to kind of work around a little bit, look around and pull out some of the old shit that we don't need anymore and start to get a little bit more clear on it. But until we have, if we don't have that space, it's really hard to do it. And that's why, I going back to your question, I feel like I didn't answer it, effectively about what I suggest to people. I think if you can find a local men's group or a local yoga class, something that, yes, it's going to make you step a little bit out of your comfort zone at first, but that there's real people there. And then once you're there, you can decide whether it's for you or not. But if I reckon that just by going there, you're going to get some clarity on something about your inner world, let's call it, that may really help point you in the direction of what's next. Maybe it's, I'm going to, like last night, I had a guy come to my yoga class and he's like, nobody knows I'm here. I don't know what I'm doing here. I've been in a really rough place. I've basically been a drunk for the last 6 years. I'm a widower of 5 years, or no, it's the other way around. I've been a drunk for 5 years. I've been a widower for 6 years. And I saw your ad and I just thought I needed to come. I said, great, man, let's see how you go. In the final relaxation, this fella, so after an hour-long class, you generally have 5 to 10 minutes of lying flat, just in stillness. Not so much meditation, but more, I call it integration, where you're just allowing yourself to be still. You're realizing you're kind of taking some time to be with the way that we've created shifts energetically in the body through the yoga breathing and movement. And this fellow found himself fully sobbing, really letting emotions out. And he came and chatted to me after class. He said, I don't know what happened, but I feel so different just after that one class. Who told you I was coming? Who knew? He's like, it felt like that whole class was for me, and I thought, yeah, it was, it really was. And from there, and he's like, I'm going to be back next week. I don't know what you did to me, but I'm going to be back next week. And I hear that all the time, like people who just feel they can trust me, and then they try it out, and then it works for them. Is it going to work for everybody? Absolutely not. But like I said before, the law of attraction. Trust your gut on, okay, I saw that ad 2 or 3 times. I'm going to go check out that class. Or my mate told me about this men's group that he's been going to. I'll give it a go this week. And by putting yourself in that position where you're kind of leaning into the unknown a little bit, it opens you up just to move some things, to break the pattern of whatever you're stuck in. And some of us might not even realize we're stuck in something until we, rock up to one of these, I call them a pattern interrupt. It's an event that interrupts the pattern of just going to work, coming home, making dinner, doing the chores, taking the kids off to whatever. And this is just something that's a little bit out of the ordinary. And you might only do it once a month. You might do it every week. You might make it a daily thing if you find a group of men that you want to hang out with every day, and you meet up to do a run or do an ice bath or something like that. But those relationships really, I feel, are what makes the difference, more so than whatever it is you're doing, whether it's the yoga or the breathing. It's the fact that you're there with real people connecting over something that's not usual, not drinking, not cooking, that's not just gossiping. Our energy is focused in on something deeper than that. And that's where I feel people really see the biggest amount of impact in their lives.
Mm. Yeah, incredible. I think that's that pattern interrupt is a really good phrase to use, I think, and we talked about distractions, there's disrupt that distraction, like stop that point of being distracted by having over time the ability to create the space between, wanting to go to that distraction. And the other thing you mentioned there was essentially about trust and building that trust and finding that place that you trust. And like old mate that rocked up last night, he probably doesn't even realize that level of intuition that come from that, and that you built through the practice and the people obviously the other people in the room have been there, have felt that trust, and he's now in that environment of a community that he now feels that he can contribute towards by coming back again another time. And that's deeper within himself. He wouldn't have realized that that's an actual thing. And over time, he'll probably develop that level of awareness. But right now, he's tasting the ice cream. He's going to give it. He's going to give it some time to really settle in. And it's right place, right time. All that sort of stuff that is really important to follow. And I think if we can remove those distractions and not scroll past something that you feel is really important to watch on your Facebook feed or whatever it is, stop and watch, because it could be that ad, or it could be something that triggers your mind to, or your heart to follow along this path now, because it's possibly really important for you. I think,
and just on that, Liam, if I may, I just want to emphasize that, yes, there is a lot of really incredibly useful, helpful networks out there online, and coaching videos and inspirational talks that one can listen to. But I firmly believe that the best thing that we can do is to take that initiative to go connect in real time, face to face with people, if that's possible. I know a lot of people have really busy lives, may not live in an area where those things are popping up all the time. But if they are, I urge you to if you feel even the slightest bit intrigued or interested, to go and meet real people doing it, because there is something about that energy exchange, like you just really well described about last night. It was the fact that whole room was filled with people who were creating a safe space for this guy to drop in a little bit deeper. Were they looking at, were they doing eye gazing, or were they saying, hey, mate, you can let it all go? No, it was unspoken, because there was a group of people who were there in non-judgment, and that's something that I think a lot of people fear is, I don't want to go put myself out there because they're going to all think I'm this or whatever. They're going to judge me. And that's not the case. In these, if you trust your intuition on it, and you follow that, and you find yourself in a room where it feels a bit uncomfortable, it might actually allow you to uncover some things within yourself that you really need to,
100%. I think one of the things that I think is really important, and you mentioned, a few of the people that you really like to work with, and those are really high demanding sort of roles that these people play. The mining sector, FIFO, parents, obviously, and business owners are a bit of a spread of who you're sort of. I suppose your main sort of demographic that you find passion in being able to support, because that's a big shift, for a lot of people to move from constantly on to being able to have that space. And so, for there's a lot of our guys inside the community, the Dad's Only Yarn Barn that are FIFO, that are current and ex-serving military, that have done deployments, that are on deployments, that are police, teachers, the whole works. So as I've talked about this a number of times as well, is that, some really solid ways that we can help ourselves is by having tools. And I think this really helps with men as well, is having tools that you can use. You mentioned practical tools and practical strategies, but also things that can be done in real time. So for the guys that are listening now, like if you were to sort of pop out one thing of one sort of nugget of wisdom, or one tool or strategy that you could suggest, and we've covered a range of different things here today, but if there's one thing that you could suggest to these guys that are listening, or girls that are listening, what is something that they could do, like today, this afternoon, as they're listening to this, or some stage during the week, to that is practical, that they can do in real time without, spending 3 hours on the lawn under a tree doing a transformational breathwork journey or something. Like there's a whole range of different things that we can do that are really powerful, that take a lot of time. But when we're talking about sitting in the car between, leaving work and going to home, or going before going into the office, or before jumping on a plane, or whatever it is, what is something that you would suggest to these guys that they could try now?
Yeah. Well, mate, I must say that you did a really beautiful Facebook Live. I think it was last week. I can't remember the exact term that you called the physiological sigh. Is that right?
Yep.
Is that
That's it. Yep.
That's great practice, and I think that is really perhaps what I would suggest in terms of a breathing technique that immediately changes the way that your nervous system is operating. A big deep inhale, and then followed up with a quick sharp inhale. So filling up your lungs completely, and then taking another quick inhale, and then audibly sighing and relaxing your body as you do that. And like you said so well, man, I encourage everybody to go to Liam's page and listen to that and watch that. It is a beautiful practice that does have an immediate effect, and science has proven, and I love that you mentioned that. Apart from that, man, I would say I hear you asking for something in your car, but if you have the opportunity just to go and, I know you kind of, we're saying not to go sit out under a tree.
Or not to, just like, that would be ideal. Minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes.
Yeah. But if you can take 5 minutes just to turn your attention to nature, to look at the clouds, do the stuff that you used to do when you were 5 years old, 7 years old, and become absolutely fascinated with a blade of grass. Imagine that you have just taken all the drugs in the world and you are so blown away by the way that nature works. Whether you're staring at bark, touching it, smelling it, that is going to shift you out of the ego-oriented thoughts that are telling you that there's so much to do. I've got to do this. My life is fucked. I'm so depressed. I've got, nobody loves me. Whatever those thoughts are that are running through your head will slowly start to fade away if you can just take 5 minutes I'm looking out the window as we speak, looking at the grass and the way that the sun is just, coming through the leaves, and there's interesting patterns of shadows, the way that the wind is kissing the leaves of the trees, and how individual leaves move differently. Like, yeah, it's a bit romantic, it's a bit poetic, but that's cool. It's actually really good for you to do that. And it changes a pattern interrupt. It changes for men, we're super analytical most of the time. We're overthinking everything. And if we can just put ourselves in I say to people, imagine that you were that blade of grass. Imagine that you were that leaf. Because my understanding, I come from, my background is in environmental studies and ecology. And as I was studying that in uni, I became really distressed by the fact that everything we were doing was objectifying nature. It was taking our experience out of our relationship out of the study and saying, well, this is just part of nature. We need to dissect it and label it. And I was like, hang on, no, we are nature. Every breath we take is absolute proof that we could not exist without anything, without everything around us. Nothing in nature exists in isolation. So our mind tries to create an isolation chamber, and that's where we are lost, where we feel overwhelmed, because it's just we don't have the sense of connection, the sense of belonging that our ancestors had, because they were just inherently connected to nature through the way that they lived, not necessarily even from a spiritual point of view, but just because everything that they did was a reminder, a tangible reminder that we are part of this living system. So for us humans living in the modern world, that's where most of our problems, let's say, come from, is the fact that we are, fully disconnected from the world around us and trying to make everything work through our heads. But when we drop into the body, drop into the breath, drop into an awareness, a sensory awareness of the world around us, then that stuff starts to become less and less important. And we feel at ease. We feel that what is true peace and contentment. I think there's a really important distinction between being happy, which is what we chase by spending money on Land Cruisers and big houses, is thinking that the next thing is going to make us happy, and actually just being content, being really appreciative of what is here. Not even coming from the place of what do I have or what I don't have, but what is here? What is this life? And how can I just enjoy? How can I just be with what is? And it just takes, like you said, 5 minutes sitting in the car, feeling your breath to drop into that appreciation state. Or looking at the sun, looking at the clouds, and looking at the moon at night. Oftentimes, that's the only time I have as a father. After the kids have gone to bed, after my wife has fallen asleep, I'm out there at 12 a.m. looking at the moon, even just for 5-10 minutes. And that is enough to recharge me to say, okay, I'm still here. Life is amazing. I'm going to go to sleep, even with a head full of worries, It's just kind of bringing me back, grounding,
I think that's a beautiful way to close out our chat here. I think what we've talked about today is a lot about removing those distractions, finding some clarity, committing to some sort of action towards a better self, and then like you just mentioned there is just stopping. Taking some time, a few minutes, just to reconnect, ground ourselves with what is just a constant around us that we don't necessarily see and pay attention to and admire. And that is just the nature of life, the cycle of life, that everything that is happening, the moon goes up and goes down, the sun goes up and goes down. It's just a natural part of life. Oftentimes we overanalyze even that element of it. It's just stepping outside and just seeing and feeling and touching and smelling all the stuff that is constantly around us. And through that, and I don't even know if this was necessarily a part of part of the tool that you sort of, or strategy that you suggested was, it was just that time, just spend some time focusing on those little things, like that blade of grass, like you suggested, is just be out there, be in nature, be able to support the space of clarity that comes from realizing that we are just a small speck of this whole journey of the life of the earth, and everything around us. But we have so much power in that, and we have so much ability within us to be able to create it the best way that we want to, that is going to bring us the most joy, and like you said, contentment as well. I think that's a really, really cool way to close out. You go for it.
Yeah, I just want to say that it, since we are fathers here and we're talking about owning our role as fathers, this is something that you can absolutely do with your young kids. I mean, teenagers are less likely to join you in staring at a blade of grass. But actually, there's a Bluey episode. Funny enough, there's a Bluey episode where Bandit goes out and he's so utterly fascinated by a leaf and the way that it looks when he holds it up to the sun. And I love that they brought that in, because that is such, Bluey has some great ideas for how to engage with our children and still be true to ourselves. And so this exercise that I'm suggesting of going out and staring at a blade of grass for 5 minutes, would be absolutely enhanced if you invited your young one to join you in that, because they're going to see shit that you don't, and they're going to help you drop into that and stay curious. That's the biggest thing, is how can we stay curious about the world around us, stay curious about what's happening within us before we jump to conclusions, before we start categorizing and putting things in boxes. I wonder why I'm feeling sad right now. I wonder why I'm feeling overwhelmed. I wonder what it's like to be a blade of grass. I wonder what it's like to be a 3-year-old again. That frame of mind is really going to open us up more than the thoughts of, I need to do meditation, I need to go do my breath work. All of these should do's are not helpful. So stay curious, spend time with your kids, roll around in the mud, and smile.
Perfect. That's awesome. Yeah. Agreed. And just a quick sidetrack to Bluey. Like tons of content on there around understanding our emotions and having those conversations as well. So whoever's the author or writing Bluey stuff is clearly tapping into some really good stuff there. Hey Chris, appreciate you spending some time with us in the Yarn Barn. Just quickly before we go, how can guys find out more about what you do and get in touch with you if they've really resonated with your message?
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I do have a website. It's true-nature.co, but I'm not very active on there. It's just kind of a placeholder. Really, the best way to find me is on Facebook. True Nature Retreats is my Facebook page, or just send me a friend request at Christopher David. I'm in the ADN group there, Australian Dads Network. So I really I think that's probably a good place to connect. But yeah, happy to have a chat anytime with anybody out there.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Liam.